Hey, how are you guys?
Good. Hello.
Yay. So we're really excited to have you on, Sarah. Thanks for agreeing to do an interview with us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I always obviously love this group. So happy to be a resource.
Yeah, we're happy to have you back on as part of our NeuroCollaborative learning party that we're doing recorded interview with you. So
Learning
exciting.
party.
So
Yeah.
we're just going to do a little bit of an interview with you, just ask you some questions that we're interested in and some that our group has posed. Would love to just jump right in and have you tell the group a little bit about yourself and personally yourself as well as your background in PT.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. So I am obviously a Parkinson's physical therapist. I got my doctorate in PT in 2012 from Texas State. So what is it, 2019 now? I don't feel like I've been practicing that long, but I guess 7 years is good enough. So in that time, I started at a hospital right out of school, outpatient, did both acute care and outpatient for about 2.5 years. And at the end of that time was when I got the Parkinson's bug. I actually went to power workshop with Claire. That's where I met Claire. And I think at that workshop, I was like, well, this is what I'm doing with the rest of my life. So I walked up to Claire and I was like, how do I make this like my living? I was just super jazzed because it was, I've always been interested in prevention and wellness and helping people in the neuro community kind of get back on their feet. And it was just this beautiful mix of exercise and prevention and was super pumped. So within, I think, maybe 6 months, I had quit my outpatient job and started at home health while I launched Invigorate Physical Therapy and Wellness, which was a mobile physical therapy practice just solely concentrated on Parkinson's. So I know we'll talk about all of the ins and outs of mobile therapy, but it has been a wild ride. Now I've transitioned to producing online programs for people diagnosed with Parkinson's, exercise-based. We're working on a nutrition course, really just education for people diagnosed with Parkinson's. And personally, I live in Austin. It's a beautiful day. Married, no kids. I know sometimes that matters to people who are like starting their own business or like, do you have anything else going on? And I don't know how people do this with children. I really don't. Just like, I bow to you people. But we don't have that going on right now. And yeah, super supportive husband. Thankfully, I couldn't do it without him. And that's really the overview of what I've
Great.
got going on. Yeah.
Why did you end up starting the mobile practice then and leaving your other job?
I saw a lot of opportunities. Honestly, I've always wanted to start like a wellness clinic. I think I've talked about this before, but I always had it in my head that I'd start a wellness clinic and it would be physical therapy and nutrition and OT and speech and all of these things. That's expensive though. I mean, I think Claire's in the search party for like new spaces. And I know that Reactive, just got through looking for property. It's really expensive to rent. And so whenever I was at the hospital trying to kind of drum up how I would do this, I came across Jared Carter and, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on her name, at Prana PT. Anyway, it'll come back to me. But there were these mobile practices of people who had, started up with a very low investment, low risk. And it was a quick startup and they could kind of get their feet wet and grow their practice while they were saving up for a brick and mortar clinic. I never got to the brick and mortar part, but it was just when you look at all the expenses of starting up a brick and mortar and you pair it or compare it next to the mobile practice, it was really a no-brainer for me. And I wanted to get going right away. I had the idea I wanted to start. We'll talk about mistakes that I made because of that later. But it was just a combination of it was easy to start. And then the population I wanted to serve, the Parkinson's community, they really found a lot of value for to find a physical therapist who would come to them because they're already driving all over the place, going to see doctors and going to appointments, and it takes forever to drive, and then, you know, your medication might be on or off. If someone comes to you when you want them to come to you, then that's a huge added value. So it was a good combination of all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because you kind of want to get started right away, low investment to get started. You can serve people kind of where they are. You have the flexibility. Definitely makes sense to like try that model out first before you sort of commit to space or all the other things that it would take to start your own clinic spot. So maybe you can talk a little bit then about like what it was like getting started and the steps you took to get started. Did like Jared Carter, or like the Prana PT person, help you understand like what you needed to do, or what was that process like for you?
Jared Carter's resources, I would say, did help. I think he's got an ebook, a couple ebooks, How to Start Your Cash-Based Practice. I read that front to back. The Medicare and Cash-Based PT, I read front to back. I would highly encourage everyone watching to read those resources. The other thing that I meant to mention of starting a home, like a mobile practice, was that I could do home health and see clients. And there are some like logistics that have to happen there, but that was a really easy way to transition into mobile-based practice, because you can see clients for a company, but then also, you know, see your own clients on the side. And there's some nuances in there, but that was like another really nice thing. You could decrease your risk, still get paid, and still grow your practice. So, but as far as getting started, I read those books, and there are just some basic things that I also wrote an ebook because I got this question quite a bit, and I didn't feel like it was laid out step by step for everybody. So I do have, I think it's 12 steps to starting your dream practice. I went through those 12 steps, and I think I spent less than $5,000 on all of those things combined. It includes, you know, filing for your EIN number, registering your business name. Let's see, I've got a whole list of them. You can download the ebook. I'm sure you guys will talk about it, but the first real step is establishing your business and finding a healthcare attorney. So if you haven't done those two things yet, having a healthcare attorney, maybe you guys could speak to who you know of that's available now, but having a healthcare attorney and like setting up your business is the first steps. And then you kind of get into setting up your bank account and purchasing liability insurance, all those basics. Do you want me to read from my ebook, or you guys can kind of reference it?
It doesn't hurt. I think read those steps. It's good to hear all of them.
Okay, I'll read through them. So number one was getting a hold of a healthcare attorney. I think everyone would cheers to that one. You want to just make sure that you have all of your I's dotted and T's crossed as far as talking with someone who's can speak to what you want to do from a legal perspective. Number two was file for your business's certificate of formation with the state. So I'm in Texas. I did that with the state of Texas. I think in Texas it costs a couple $100s. Step three was filing for your tax ID or your EIN number online, and you do that through the IRS website. Once you have your EIN set up, which is that number, it's like your social security number for your business. You can set up a bank account, which was my step 4. You can set up a payment system like PayPal or Stripe. Next step comes purchase professional liability insurance. And gosh, that was fun. I think my first year, it cost me $750 for professional liability insurance. I'm just curious, in California, what does it run in California?
It's not that much more. I mean, for me now, I think it's around 800 still just for professional liability. So yeah, I mean, it definitely depends on if you're like part-time or full-time. So like when I first started, I had part-time and then transitioned to full-time. And it was different, you know, once the corporation was filed, because I started kind of as a sole proprietor. So there were some things that changed, but I really personally I don't feel like it is, you know, unrealistic at all for what we're doing and, you know, what the limits of coverage are.
Oh yeah, it's a must have.
Yeah. And there are definitely, like, HPSO, I think, is one of the most common ones that people use. That's the one that APTA, endorses and works with them. I have heard that they are a little bit more expensive than some other country or companies. But I have stuck with them because I've been with them now and I feel comfortable, and, my rates have been pretty stable. It's not like they're increasing all the time or anything like that.
Yeah, mine were pretty stable too. I actually, the second year, my HPSO rep called me and said, I think we have a policy that would cost less for you. So that was really nice. Mm-hmm. But I went through HPSO as well. So after the liability insurance, after all, I had my legal ducks in a row and kind of had a solid idea of that my entity was formed. That's when I started building the layers of being able to present myself to the public. So I built a website was my next step. And I think there was a question from your community about website and tips on the website. And we'll talk more about that. But I tried to do the website on my own. Don't do it. Just hire somebody that knows what they're doing. Even if it's a cheap initial startup, hire somebody who knows what they're doing. We'll talk about that later. But you purchase your domain name from something like GoDaddy or Bluehost. I use Squarespace. Right now. I tried to use WordPress, and that is an investment of time and energy that I would not encourage, but I have a resource in the ebook, and we'll talk about him later, but Daniel Fava from createmytherapistwebsite.com is awesome. He's got a lot of resources, and he can help you. He actually now helped Jared Carter revamp his website. So I met him a couple years ago, and he's great. But anyway, so after you build your website, then I went into purchasing my EMR, electronic medical record. I used WebPT and eFax, or it's SFax, is the electronic fax system. So, but I know that there are a lot of cash-based PTs out there who use Google and just have it set up so that it's HIPAA compliant. I didn't do it that way. I don't know a lot about, maybe you guys do, but I don't know a lot about how to make Google Docs HIPAA compliant. But I think that Aaron LeBauer has some resources on how to use Google in a HIPAA compliant way. But I use WebPT and SFax for my fax system. That was my step 8. We then dove into, so then I had my online space formed, and I could start working my way into establishing all my paperwork and my intake forms. So my step 9 was to create intake and consent forms. And I linked to in our ebook, but pranapt.com is where she has a Cash PT starter kit for documentation. That's a really good resource. And then also Aaron LeBauer has a Cash PT toolkit that are really good for intake and consent forms, which you want to run by your healthcare attorney once they're finished to make sure that, they're all actually legally binding documents. Step 10, I started a few tracking logs. So I started tracking my mileage, started tracking my expenses, and my new lead tracking. So my new client lead tracking. Those are really important. You want to have a mileage log for tax purposes. You want to have expenses log. Honestly, if I could go back and do it again, I would just purchase QuickBooks and use that for my expenses tracking. But I used Excel for, way back when. And then we'll talk, I think, later about tracking key performance indicators, KPIs, but you really want to start tracking as much data as you can for the people who are coming to you, the people who are signing up with you. You want to keep track of that data because you want to be able to improve it moving forward, if that makes sense. So I started those logs. Then step 11 was setting up your email provider. So something like MailChimp is free. I think that's what NeuroCollaborative uses. That's where I started. I've since moved up to more, fancy email providers. Now I use ActiveCampaign, but I was on MailChimp for a really long time. And that's just a way to obviously contact your clients, potential clients. And then number 12, step 12 was the final step that I talk about in the ebook, but it was honestly one of the most important for me, which was getting really clear on your practice act and your rules of your state. So I'm in Texas, and my biggest concern was the fact that I'm treating a majority of Medicare beneficiaries. So I need to make sure that I'm compliant with the law, the current law for treating people who are Medicare beneficiaries if I'm not accepting Medicare. So I read my practice act front to back. I read my rules front to back. I made an algorithm. I ran it by my healthcare attorney. I was so paranoid about, I don't know who I thought was watching me. The government would be like, come down on me if I treated any Medicare beneficiary ever. They'd be like, you're going to jail and it's $1 million fine. And I just thought the world was going to collapse. So I was like really anal about that. And then everyone I talked to was like, literally 0 cases have been brought to court. I'm like, well, I don't want to be the first one. So I talk a lot about how to kind of get clear on who you treat and how to use language and what you say in the ebook, but also Jared Carter's resources for those are awesome. So those are my 12 steps. Easy peasy. Not really, but you know.
Yeah, that's a lot of good info. My gosh, you went through a lot, and that's really helpful to organize it like that. I have a lot of questions just like as we run through it, but I feel like the biggest one that's like burning for a lot of our people that we get a lot of questions about in our community is around the Medicare decision. And I would love if you talked a little bit about why you decided to go cash-based and what that process was like for you getting that set up and some of like the key tips that you've learned about, being not in Medicare. I know I just asked a million questions in a row, but like maybe you get the gist of like, why did you decide not to go in with Medicare?
I'm probably not the only one in this group that feels this way, but and I want to offer the preface of like, you can create a mobile practice and accept Medicare. Jennifer Anderson from Root PT, she is participating. I don't know the language because I'm not in there, but she's accepting Medicare and I think also cash-based. I'm not sure what her dynamic is, but they're doing really well and they're growing. For me personally, when I first started, I didn't know how to accept Medicare. And so I was like, I'm just not going to. I had heard that the administration part was like overwhelming. You have to hire someone for claims. And I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Also working in the hospital system, just being on that end and having to fight tooth and nail for approval for 6 visits. Every 4 weeks we'd have to fight with Medicare to give us more visits or fight with insurance. And I just didn't want my practice to become me fighting with insurance companies because I didn't feel like that was a valuable use of my time. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose not to engage with Medicare. At the time that I started my practice, it was a little bit of a different environment than what we have now. The Medicare cap was in place. And if you wanted to treat someone over, I forget what the cap actually was, 1900 or something like that, you had to, apply for approval. And if you were going to treat them beyond the cap, you had to get an ABN and the whole thing. And so it was just like a lot to kind of coordinate. And I didn't feel like I had the ability to do it. And that was paired with the fact that like I was already seeing some Parkinson's clientele in my practice. And they were like, I'll pay you to just come train me. I just want to like have somebody who will hold me accountable. I don't need to use my insurance. And so I already had people who were saying that they would, pay me if I came to their house. So that's honestly, I wish I had a more like wise answer for why I didn't want to accept Medicare. I just didn't want to participate in like the insurance situation. And that did affect who I could see, because I'm not seeing clients mobily anymore by choice. It was more lucrative, honestly, to see clients than to do the online practice, if I'm being honest. But I stopped seeing clients on the mobile side, and I forgot why I told you that. But it was, I forget why I told you that.
Because you were saying like how being cash-based affected who you saw at the time in terms of, you know, obviously there's lots of people who are looking to use their Medicare. So it affected who you saw, you know, maybe how many potential clients you had. And you were just saying that was could, so it was past tense. That's what brought you to that moment.
Right. Yeah. I think it could have been incredibly lucrative to see people at all phases of where their Parkinson's were, and that would require me to accept Medicare. So to be super clear, I only felt comfortable accepting cash-based patients who were not, who didn't qualify for physical therapy. So if you hadn't been through physical therapy before, if you had a recent decline in independence or mobility function, thank you, decline in function. Most of the time I would refer you to a PT who accepts insurance. And a lot of these people, you know, my rule was if someone needed PT, they actually like needed skilled physical therapy based off of our conversation, I wouldn't offer to see them unless they initiated the conversation. So they can see me out of their own free will. So they'd be talking to me and I'd be like, it sounds like you definitely need physical therapy based off of these things. I'm happy to come out and see you. Also, I can refer you to a physical therapist who accepts insurance. And they'll be like, oh, you don't accept insurance? I would say no. And I would let them ask me, well, can I pay cash, or, you know, how does that work? And if they didn't, then I just referred them to a PT who would see them for, under their insurance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good. I was going to ask you, how do you stay out of the gray area then of like seeing clients with Medicare and keep that a little bit separate? Because I know that is always a big question for us of like, when we're doing wellness, when we're doing PT, and like, how do we kind of stay out of the area? So you ended up just trying to see people who were maybe not necessarily needing actual like skilled PT where they would be using their Medicare. And I like how you say you kind of set it up, the conversation around like, oh, I'm happy to see you, but, you know, I can refer you to a therapist who takes insurance, versus like letting that be the first thing that you lead with is like, well, I'm not in network with Medicare or something like that. So that's kind of how they were able to bring it up. And then it created an opportunity for you that you weren't pushing them to pay out of pocket, which is like kind of one of those things with the Medicare beneficiaries, that we can't necessarily like tell them to pay you out of pocket, but like if they bring it up. Is that kind of what your attorney helped like set up for you to do it like that?
She thought that I was being a little bit too conservative, which is fine. I would rather have my attorney tell me I'm being too conservative than being too liberal, but as far as that risk is concerned. But yeah, it was honestly, once you get into the practice of having that conversation, it develops naturally, because I would spend 30, 40 minutes talking to someone about what their goals are, what they're struggling with, what they've tried before, what they haven't tried before. And so they're invested in that conversation, and they obviously know that they can tell that I know what I'm talking about, but also I'm not trying to just be like, ooh, come like be my patient. So if they're truly interested in it, then the conversation will evolve to the point where they're comfortable with you and they'll say, okay, I want to see you. Do you accept insurance? I actually don't accept insurance. I'm completely out of network, private pay. If you want to see a provider who accepts insurance, I'm happy to refer you. I've got a lot of connections in the community, but I'm not able to accept any insurance. And so if they're like, ooh, that's a problem, who can I see? Refer them. And if they're like, no, I really like you, you sound like you would really understand what I'm going through and could treat me well, I'd be like, okay, here are options. And then after that point, I would say, if you're going to pay out of pocket, you have to sign a release waiver with me that says that you agree not to submit a claim to Medicare. So we'll sign that paperwork. And then at the first initial eval, we'll set it up. We do intake forms, but I also sit down and I reread them this form that says, you understand you're paying out of pocket. You can't submit any claims to Medicare. And then they sign it. And I usually have their spouse or their caregiver present so that, and then both of them sign if need be, just to have all of my ducks in a row. Honestly, I think that is the most conservative way that you could possibly do this. But I like my PT license. So that's how I decided to keep it.
And so then did you still call what you were doing physical therapy, or did you call it wellness or personal training? How did you address that?
If people went through that whole process and they were coming to me for skilled physical therapy, then I call it what it is. If, say, someone comes after they've seen you, Claire, for, physical therapy. Well,
she's in wellness too.
Yeah, different. So say they went to, Eric Roden, he's in Austin. He's an amazing PT. He'll see someone for 12 sessions, discharge them, but they need an accountability buddy. So they come to me and they're like, yeah, I just got done with Eric. I'm feeling pretty good. I just want to kind of continue this. That's a wellness package that was really easy to sell. It was really black and white. I actually created some spreadsheet, flow chart I can share with you guys that might make this visualization easier. But my check boxes were, have you had physical therapy in the last 6 months? If you have, then I can see you for wellness. If you haven't, but you're coming to me and you say that you just want fitness, but you haven't had a decline in function, you haven't had a fall in the last 6 months, then we're just seeing you for wellness, and that's a wellness package. So then I would call it what it is, because that's what it is.
I'm curious too about the Medicare stuff as well. With you have I like the process that you had of going through the conversation, involving the family member, because I think that's really important too, because it still is confusing for just the patient, but having the spouse on board as well too, and then in person, having them sign the paperwork again. And when you say that you're not going to submit claims to Medicare, what do you give them that they could submit? If you're not giving them CPT codes, how do they actually, what would they even submit to Medicare?
They wouldn't be able to submit anything without me giving them more information.
Yeah.
The reason why I have them sign that is because I want there to be record that they both acknowledge that they're seeing me voluntarily and agree to pay. So it's not necessarily if they submitted a claim, I'd be but you told me in this form that you wouldn't. It's more really documenting that I got verbal approval and they understand everything that's going on, because they won't be able to submit a claim unless I give them, like you said, all the information that they need to submit a claim.
Right. But then at least they're not calling Medicare and being hey, I'm seeing this PT and blah, blah, blah. And then somehow your name gets released to them or something like that. Is that the thought a little bit? Or
it's almost even more so say this example happened. Someone comes to me for and they agree, they say that, oh yeah, I'm fine not submitting claims. And their spouse signs it. They sign it, their spouse signs it, they understand, but their daughter comes along and is wait, you're saying you're paying cash for PT? You can get that through your insurance. I'm totally going to submit claims or whatever it is. I have documentation that they both understood that they weren't. So if she comes to me and she's I want to submit claims, I've got a problem. I can be we went over it twice. They signed it. Your mom was there. Everybody was there. And it's just kind of just more of a just in case type of clause.
And one more question too about the Medicare and documentation piece. And I know that is really complicated, and the admin part of it and the billing and all of that. But I was kind of surprised when you said you went with an EMR right away, knowing that you were doing cash-based and that the documentation requirements are, obviously if we're still doing PT, we have to document, but I would think, or I kind of have thought that the EMR piece it is helpful for just notes when you're doing cash-based, but the bigger piece of having EMR is because of billing and being able to submit the billing really easily and fax your notes to doctors easily and things like that. So why did you end up choosing an EMR right away versus doing a free option like Google?
Yeah. a lot of the reasons you just said, as far as it makes it easy to submit those things to physicians for plan of care, like getting plans of care signed. For when I did do physical therapy with someone, I still needed to get plans of care signed. And I didn't really trust the HIPAA compliant Google situation. It's legit now. A lot of people have used, a lot of people have figured it out, but I was really, really conservative again about any information getting leaked. And so I would rather err on the side of pay a little bit too much, but know that like they have gone through the whole process of making sure that HIPAA stuff is going to stay HIPAA'd. I just felt more comfortable with that, honestly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was a more of an investment for sure.
What kind of rates were you paying initially?
Oh gosh, I don't even remember. I can look it up and let you know what that number was. I couldn't even, maybe 100. I don't know.
Oh.
I don't even know, maybe 120.
Did you have to get like an estimate of how many clients you would be seeing? And then sort of, is that how you approached them with it and got your rate based on like your volume?
Yeah, I think I had to give them like a range of 0 to 50, or I'm gray on how all that is so long ago. Mm-hmm. But I do think it was based off of volume, and I had the lowest plan. I think I ended up bumping up one plan that included the admin. That was another part of it, was the scheduling, because there's an admin feature, I think, in WebPT where they would send reminder emails or send reminder calls, which my patients really, really liked. So I paid for the extra. So I didn't have to call everybody every single night to remind them that I would be there. So that was another nice thing about WebPT, is they had, at the time, they had reminder calls, which was nice. And scheduling, I did all my scheduling through there, so I could just print off someone's schedule. It was convenience mostly. And then the occasional plan of care that I had to get signed.
Mm-hmm. And early on, when you were having those conversations with people, were you tracking like what percentage were saying, yes, I do need to use my insurance, that you were kind of referring out, versus how many people were sticking with you? Is that one of the things that you tracked? And I'm just curious, not that you have to like say an exact number or anything, but did you feel like, with those phone calls, because really people would see, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. They're willing to come to my home. Seems like such a great situation. Did you feel like, were you even say converting more people to you seeing them, or did you feel like you were referring a lot of people out? How did that go? And, kind of from the beginning, and did that shift over time, kind of depending on who was actually finding you and reaching out? Maybe they already knew a little bit about kind of how you were running your practice.
Yeah, I would say I did track it. I had a lot. I just had an Excel like client lead tracking. It was name, email, phone number. I set up a contact form through my website that would auto-populate this document also when they submitted their information as a contact inquiry. But they'd have a little blurb about what brings them to Invigorate, like what they want to work on, what part of the town they're in, maybe like what doctor they see. And then as I would call them, I would like write notes in that, I would already have, this is something that was nice about having all this intake form already like filled out, is because if somebody said they want to work on their balance so that they can go hiking, whatever, in the Grand Canyon, then I can call them and be like, hey, I'd love to help you with your balance. Here's what I would do with you should we work together. And you can make it really personal. But anyway, I would document kind of what we talked about. And at the end, if I referred them, I would record that. If I booked an initial eval, I would record that. And then depending on how the initial eval went, I would update it to say like, yeah, we did a wellness package, or yeah, we're doing, a la carte PT session by session, and just kept track of it over time. And I would say at the beginning, I was very bad at having conversations with people about having them pay cash for physical therapy. I was so bad at it, and I felt so guilty. Honestly, I was like, you're going to pay me lots of money that you could go and get this, you know, for $30 somewhere else or free most of the time. Back then the copays were like very, very low. So I've had a lot of guilt, and I think I botched a lot of conversations because I'd just be like, oh, I can't tell you how much I'm worth. I can't tell you how much I charge. I know it was that worthiness thing.
And how did you get over that? Or like, what did you do did it just naturally get better with practice over time? Or like, was that something you actively did something about?
Yeah, I had to get over like this shame component. I had a lot of conversations with my husband about why I feel bad about charging people, journaled a lot about it. But honestly, then I started seeing people, you know, I would start to see those first couple people, and Claire, like, I watch your Instagram account on a daily, and you start to see those people who get so much better care from you than they would have at any clinic going once a week because they can only, you know, get that much from their insurance or afford it or make it. And you're seeing them 3 times a week for 4 weeks, and you're like, wow, I'm not even ashamed that these are the results you're getting. And so that really fueled a lot of our conversation. I'd be like, yeah, you got to pay out of pocket for our services, but I promise you, like, you will see those results. And I think also keeping track of the success stories, like you're doing an awesome job, Claire. I love your Instagram, but it's like, you've got so much social proof of what you do is working. You know, and so it's just after a little while, you start to get in the swing of like having those conversations, helping people see the value, and you stop feeling like you're, you know, taking advantage of someone, which was my problem. I felt like I was taking advantage of someone. But really, if you think about chiropractic, if you think about so many other healthcare practices that are now like concierge, people are willing to pay for what works. And if you work, then charge what you're worth. If you don't work, then don't start a business, you know, like,
yeah. And that's what I think a lot of physical therapists kind of don't know how well it can work, because when you work inside a system where you can't do it the right way, people don't necessarily get better. And so then you think that's all that's possible, you know? True. And so unless you're in a setting where you see amazing things happen and they're pushing the boundaries in terms of what people have access to, whether it's by adding classes or doing some cash-based or doing intensives, you know, even just running insurance-based programs differently, you don't know that it's possible. And so then, yeah, you definitely wouldn't feel comfortable going out and you wouldn't know what we're worth. So I feel like it's this like self-fulfilling pattern where, like, you know, PT is like, we know it works. Like, otherwise, how could we work in this field? But I don't think we know how much it works or how dramatic it can be and how much it can change people's lives when we're working in these environments that really restrict, you know, what people get access to and how much we can help them.
Yeah, definitely. And that reminds me, thinking about Instagram and stuff, another contact form or intake form, I always have a photograph release waiver. I don't know if you do that too, Claire, but that's another. If you're going to take pictures of your clients, you need to make sure you have that release waiver. I always tried to not take pictures of people's faces unless they were very aware that, like, you know, they signed the release, and I was also like, do you mind if I feature you or like talk about you? Otherwise, yeah, just be careful with posting all that stuff without a release. But yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, it is self-fulfilling though. And you walk out of people's homes or out of your class and you're like, yep, this is totally, like, I'm totally worth this.
Yeah. I mean, not that this interview is about me, but one thing that brought up for me is with programs, like, how strict do I want to be in terms of like letting people come to class 1 time a week or like doing PT 1 time a week? Because I mean, that's better than nothing, but it is, you know, the people in my programs who are getting so much better, it's because they come 4 or 5 times a week. So I've like dabbled a little bit with like, you know, and I feel like there are some like wellness programs and different things that are strict. It's like, if you want to come, this is the program because this is what we know works. And that's like the only people we're going to accept are the ones who want to commit to that. Yeah. Versus like trying to be as accessible as possible to people and like knowing that even 1 time a week is better than no times a week, but it is not going to be the same thing. So then when people say like, oh, I see this person getting better and like, I don't really feel that for myself. like, well, do you know how many times that person comes and exercises with us per week?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but that's just an interesting thing, I think, too, in terms of like how you set up your own programs and what happens where you work, is that like one time a week or less probably isn't going to do very much unless you have like the rare super active person, and definitely the earlier we get people, the more you can kind of get away with that. But that just made me think of that too. So did you have a lot of people, you basically did have a program where you said, based on research, we need kind of this early intensive 3 times a week for 4 weeks at least. So that's how we're going to set up our PT. Like you might want me to only come 1 time a week because that's convenient for you, but that's not evidence-based. So that's not how I'm going to run my programs.
So what I typically did, and I felt like I was going to be one of those people that was like hard and fast. And then you're like, oh, but I need to make money. So this gets flubbed a little bit. But whenever I would talk to people, I would always say, this is my style according to the research. And I would send them the research if they wanted it. Research supports that 2 to 3 times a week for 4 to 6 weeks. Ideally 3 times a week if we can swing it. Minimum 2 times a week. That's how long you can expect to be in a wellness program with me. Now, what I found was actually really valuable was because if I sold a wellness package, it was like, at some point it was like $1,600 for 12 sessions. And so people would like have a mini heart attack at that number. And so what I would say is, but there are some people who, for whatever reason, don't need or can't do 2 to 3 times a week, can only do once a week, or, and I'm willing to work with your schedule. So if we do the evaluation, I'll let you know if I feel like you're more appropriate for 2 to 3 times a week, or if we need to figure it out, we can maybe do like once a week, as long as you're doing your homework and we've got you integrated with community programs and that stuff. So then that would decrease their anxiety, because I would say if we do 1 time a week, you pay per session and it's a higher rate. So say my packages are like $110 per session. If you're paying a la carte, it might be $150 per session. So I kind of gave them, for the wellness packages at least, a little bit of incentive to commit to 2 to 3 times a week. And if they still wanted to do 1 time a week and I felt like it was appropriate, then I would do that. But very rarely would allow people to like, okay, like I'll do the initial eval, it's $225 or whatever. I could always do 1 time a week for $150. That's a lot less intimidating than paying for a package of $1,600. So we'd get there and I would sit with them and I'd show them, everything that we could do, and I'd help them have a little easy win at our first initial eval. Whether they didn't think they could skip again and they skipped after 1 session with me, they're like, okay, if I can do that, I'm all in for the package. And I hope that kind of makes sense. So and then if people would finish their 12 sessions, sometimes we'd re-up and we'd do another 12 sessions, but sometimes people are like, okay, I got this. And then they'd switch to 1 time a week with me. So I wasn't as like strict, but mainly because I needed to fill up my schedule, if I'm being honest. So
I think that's really great, because you give them the autonomy to choose then. So you're not just like deciding for them what they need and it's only like this. It's like you said, it kind of decreases their anxiety, but it also empowers them and they know what the options are. And I love how you have like a 12 session package, so they know concretely like how much are they doing. They know that there's an end point, and then they can also decide what to do at the end point. But they get a choice. And we do the same thing in our wellness packages, as well as like having the incentive to go to purchase something for a longer term and for more times a week, because we know that's what actually works. And it keeps them accountable and keeps them coming in. And then just setting up that expectation, like if you come less, here's what we know about coming less. It's not as effective. You're not going to see the same gains as someone who's coming 9 times a week for classes every week. But if you want these gains, like here's what you need to do. And then they get the chance to really choose that. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it worked out really well. And honestly, I didn't have a problem filling my schedule, because when you do the wellness packages, at least you can sit down with them at the initial eval. They pay for the eval, they pay for the sessions, and you're like, okay, like let's sit down and let's schedule all of them. Nice. And it's like, okay, I've got this Tuesday, Thursday, 2:00 slot, or this Monday, Wednesday, 10 a.m. slot. I'm going to plug you in and, here are all the dates. Are you going to be out any of those days? And so by the time I leave, like they've gotten a bunch of resources from me. They've had an easy win that they may not have thought was going to be that easy, but they've got an easy win under their belt. They've paid for it, and that hurts a lot, but they've also got a schedule. They can put me on their calendar. I go home and I have like a email sequence that I plug them into being like, I'm so happy that you joined, and send them their schedule again. So like,
that's great.
Yeah. So it does give them autonomy, and they feel like they've been like a participant in that, in that plan. So, which is key.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Another question that a lot of people have had is kind of at the beginning, how did you market and get the word out? Like you had worked some places in the community, but it sounds like you hadn't been focusing specifically on Parkinson's yet too much, right? And so this was kind of like a new thing. And that's where I feel like a lot of our members are stepping out on their own and don't necessarily have like a huge name in the community already. And so like, how do you get started? How do you meet people? How do you find people to, start being your clients?
Yeah, there is a lot of ways you can do this. And if you want an awesome book, it's called Traction, and I highly recommend it. It's about 19 marketing channels. I wish I would have read it first day of my practice.
Wait, which Traction book? Because I know there's two, because I've gotten both of them. The Gino Wickman one?
Wickman, yeah. I always want to say Gina Wiseman, but that's not right. The GW.
Yes.
I think nowadays it's a blue cover, I think now, with a red like elevation type of thing.
Oh, mine doesn't look like that.
Oh,
I feel like it's like black or gray with like an orange like cogwheel on it or something, if I'm thinking correctly. But I just wanted to clarify the author, because I think Jared Carter maybe recommended Traction, and then I downloaded it and I started listening. I'm like, I don't think this is the book he was talking about. And then I realized there was another Traction book by Gino Wickman and another guy, and that was the one, and that one is excellent.
Yes, let me see. I
have mine over on the bookshelf over there.
When I bought it, it had a yellow cover. Let me see.
Oh.
And Traction, a startup guide to getting customers, Gabriel Weinberg.
Oh, okay. So this is a different GW. This is good. Why we clarified that.
But I don't think that. Pause, everybody. How any startup can achieve explosive customer growth. Traction.
So yeah, this is a different one. Interesting.
Let me see. 19 marketing channels. Called Bullseye. I think it's a blue one. How any startup can achieve explosive customer growth.
Okay, yeah, because this one is the one I have. And that's
definitely not it.
Thing. Okay.
No. Yeah. I have not read that one. Is it good?
It's excellent. Okay. But it's more about running the business. It's not as much, it's like running an effective business and like how to set up your internal stuff in order to like keep things flowing in a really good way, and like the outcome metrics and like your organization and your meetings and like all of that kind of aspect of business running.
Man, I can't believe it's 2 GWs though. That still is like blowing my mind.
Yeah, that is insane.
Okay, so the one that you're recommending is which?
Gabriel Weinberg. It's blue.
Okay,
if you just
tell us about it.
Traction 19 marketing channels. So I read it after word of mouth failed, but I'll tell you how I started, which was word of mouth. And so I was working in the hospital, went to the power retreat or power workshop with Claire, decided that Parkinson's was going to be what I wanted to do. I had already had a Parkinson's client early on and fell in love with her. She was amazing. And after her, I had called up our local nonprofits and been like, I really love this population. How can I get involved? And so Power for Parkinson's is a nonprofit here in Austin. And I just volunteered to help them in any way that I could. And they actually asked me to start writing their newsletter. They really wanted to start a newsletter. So I was like, okay, well, I'll write a newsletter. So I helped them write their like monthly newsletter. That helped. I made some of my earliest videos for that newsletter, just trying to help out. And through them, they referred me to another nonprofit who asked me to speak in front of the local group. Your local community has a support group somewhere who wants to hear from you. And I feel like Erin and Claire are both like queens of this, but getting into the community and community outreach, like as much as you can humanly like touch people. Well, that doesn't sound right, but like get into somebody's space and like see them face to face. So I spoke in front of, I was like, did PT, Parkinson's PT, kind of like speaking in front of the nonprofits. I would go to the events and just be available and like be there. I didn't really do a lot of marketing at that point as far as like aggressively talking to people about what I do. And so it grew word of mouth. I quit my hospital job telling people that, you know, I actually didn't tell people while I was in the hospital that I was going to start my own business, but they asked me to keep, you know, them in mind. So I had their business cards, and, you know, once there was enough space, I kind of just reached out and said, you know, I'm seeing clients if you're ever interested. And that worked pretty well. It was kind of like I got my first 7 or 8 clients, which with you're selling 12 session packages, you fill up your weeks pretty fast. So I had maybe 6 to 8, 10, 12, like I would have these long-term people who would come in, they'd sign up for a 12 session package. We'd be good. We'd be seeing each other. I'd have a full schedule. I felt really good. I'd have 1 or 2 people inquire. I might be able to see them from an eval. It was really chill. And I was doing well. I was booked. I was also seeing home health clients. So I got to this point where I was like, I kind of had a small wait list for Invigorate, and I couldn't do it without quitting my home health job. This is a regret that I have, but I quit my home health job in October. And less than like 2 or 3 weeks later, I had like 0 clients for Invigorate because people got pneumonia. It was the fall, it was the winter, so people got pneumonia. People had falls, people went into rehab, people went on vacation, and I had no clients, and I had just quit my full-time job. And I was like, but I need more clients, but you can't, you know, word of mouth, you can't really turn on or off. I didn't have an email list. I had nobody to alert that I had room in my schedule. I was just like, well, that sucks. So that's when I read Traction. And that's when I really started getting more engaged on social media. As one of my marketing channels that I chose was social media. So at that point, I started doing Facebook Live broadcasts. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. If you look back at my Facebook Lives, they're terrible lighting, they're terrible mic, they're terrible everything. But I did them anyway. And so I did Facebook Lives, and that grew. Kind of learned about Facebook ads to do some paid marketing, which is another marketing channel. Learned as I went. I started targeting people in my area, and just that fueled a lot because it helped give me some presence online. So when people would search Parkinson's physical therapy Austin, then they would find me. I was also really trying hard to connect with the neurologists who would refer people to me. I would send them a handwritten card. Thank you for referring this person, you know, Mr. So-and-so or whatever. I would try and call them at the office and, you know, just be like really grateful for the people that were being referred to me.
And so did you have people who you're like, there were neurologists who were referring directly to you? And that was with them knowing that you were cash-based? Or was that like not necessarily knowing that, and then you would kind of take it from there though, and maybe some you would end up referring out if they really wanted to use insurance or not? Or were there certain neurologists who knew like kind of exactly what you were doing and referred people who maybe already were on board with?
Yeah. I would never hide the fact that I was cash-based from any neurologist. I'm trying to think back of all the sequence of events. I made flyers. little handout flyers, and I would go to all the neurologist's office and I would drop off a stack, usually with their secretary, because I have no interest in seeing you. And then I would try and follow up with an email if I could. I had conversations eventually with neurologists about my practice, but initially they really didn't care. They really didn't care to have a full-on conversation with me. They would take my card and they would take my information. They'd be like, okay, thanks. And then, they might keep me in mind. But I would meet a lot of people at the nonprofit events. So I would meet like a couple neurologists and I would talk to them about my practice. And if they asked, do you take insurance? I would say, no, I don't. I'm completely cash-based. And some of them would scoff and some of them would be like, I can't refer people to you if you don't take insurance. And that's their decision. But eventually I would get people who would find me. And then if people find you and they have a neurologist, then you can call them and say, hey, Mr. Jones is coming to see me. And they'll be like, oh, I didn't know that. I'd be like, this is what we're working on. This is my value. We're like improving. And I'd be really communicative. So I hope I'm not talking in circles, but like most of the time I wouldn't just walk up to a neurologist willy-nilly and be like, let me tell you all about my practice. It was just consistent, like unorganized, call when I can, drop off flyers when I can, just be a really attentive PT. And then now people like Dr. Peckham, who you guys don't know, but it doesn't matter. She'll tell her patients, like, you go see Sarah. I guess she doesn't anymore, but she used to be like, you could go see Sarah. She doesn't take insurance, or you could go see Eric. He does. And so she'd start presenting me as an option because I would prove my value, and she wanted to give people that option. But some neurologists just don't,
Right.
So,
follow up, like related to that marketing question. Sorry. Because this has come up in our community and some of the calls of like what marketing, like strategy to try first. You kind of talked about the word of mouth thing, which I think is a good one to hit on, and why that's hard and doesn't always work and you can't turn it on and off. But like, how did you decide to spend money on any marketing things in the beginning? I know like direct mail comes up a little bit because our people aren't always online. Like if you're serving like an older adult population. So I was just curious if you had like any thoughts on like what you did to start your marketing and which things you chose first, and if you were spending money on it.
Yep. I tried to use all of my free options first. So social media, set up your Facebook page, or whatever. I'm assuming you're talking about a Parkinson's mobile practice. Facebook is like the most social probably, and YouTube. Those are two of the like kind of an older adult population. They're on both of those platforms. I didn't really focus very much on Instagram. I didn't focus a lot on Twitter because most of the people that I wanted to see weren't on those platforms, but their family might be. So if you've got time to do it, that can be valuable. But I set up my Facebook page, set up my website, set up YouTube. So those three things are on the internet and they're searchable. So Parkinson's PT Austin, they'd hopefully find one of those places if you set it up right to kind of, if you have proper SEO on your website, they should be able to find you relatively well for free. But that doesn't always work, especially now that the internet's like full of everybody and everything that you're doing. So I exercised those free options. I made flyers. Those did cost a little bit. And I really didn't have a way to track my return on investment for those flyers because I didn't send people, now looking back, I didn't send people to an individual landing page from that flyer. So if you invigoratept.com/flyer, lame URL, but I would have to create that wet landing page on my website so that I could track who comes to that page specifically from the flyers. I didn't do that when I made the flyers. I did do a couple ads in the local newspaper, and it was the Austin American Statesman. So I would do invigoratept.com/statesman would be this landing page that I would create. And then I would advertise in the newspaper and say, contact me at invigoratept.com/statesman. And I would have that landing page. I could track who came in from that source. And I would track my return on investment. So that was an expensive ad. It was like $200 or $300. I felt like that was really expensive, but I think I had 2 conversions, which was $225 a piece. So I made $500 on the initial eval from a $200 investment. So that's a pretty good return on investment. I did some paid Facebook ads. I had no idea what I was doing, if I'm being honest. I taught myself over time after I just like shotgunned a couple ads out. My first successful Facebook campaign was for a 30-day exercise challenge that ended up going really, really well. We'll talk about that later. But I did a combination. Honestly, I was just like throwing spaghetti at the wall. I don't recommend this. I recommend tracking all your data, but I wasn't doing it. So I don't want to pretend like I had it all figured out and was, tracking all my data. But I would be mindful of like, how much did I invest and how much did I make? Let's chase whatever is working. So let's see, what other paid? I also was getting a lot of exposure through the Power for Parkinson's newsletter because I would create like wellness corner videos. And so people would see my face once a week. And that was free. So that was really nice. That could be something you could do, is find like a support group or a nonprofit or something and just create content for them that they can push out to their viewers. Don't market yourself in them. Just present your name, from what practice you're at, and then give them great value and they'll be able to find you, type of thing. So those are some things that you can start off on. But honestly, like I spent $5,000 on the basics to establish my practice. And then I don't think I did any paid marketing for like a year, maybe. So you don't have to do it at first, but it is a good marketing channel. Oh. Hi, puppy.
So what did you find to be the most successful then in terms of your marketing after, some time?
I feel like that changes a lot. Producing content, number one, hands down, whether that's Facebook Lives, YouTube videos, blog posts. If you're going to create content, you need to have a distribution plan. So how you're going to get that video out to the masses. But you could do a Facebook Live, turn it into an ad targeting your area. You could do a Facebook Live interview with an expert in your community. They could share it with their community. Then you get some exposure there. But creating content, like once you give people value, they want, you've proven your value to them. So they tend to like follow up with you versus cold calling someone or cold advertising. Just come, buy my services doesn't typically work that well. So I just really put an emphasis on creating content. I still do as much as I can. It gets lost in the shuffle of things, but content. If you can produce
you
content.
Put out amazing content.
Thank you.
And so when was it that timeline wise, when was it that you started seeing people in their home, really started seeing people for your mobile practice? And how long did you do that for? And kind of just what was your experience in general with the mobile practice?
So I quit my outpatient PT job in January of 2015 and transferred to home health while I got Invigorate up and running. So I think between January and April of 2015, I just worked on my website and worked home health and just started like the community outreach and growing word of mouth. And started really picking up my first client in April of 2015 while I was still seeing home health clients. And that continued just slow growth through September. And in October, I think I told you I quit my home health job. And November pretty much like wiped out all my clients. And then and then the next January started with like the content and doing offline ads and like reading traction. And once I read traction and implemented some of those strategies beyond word of mouth, I got to a point where I was fully booked in June of 2016 and had a wait list, like a 3-month wait list. And I'm looking at my timeline because I actually like wrote all this stuff down because I don't remember timelines whatsoever. So summer 2016 was fully booked with a wait list, and saw clients for about a year more before 2 years, March. So I have to look at my schedule. June 2016 all the way to March 2018, I was seeing clients one-on-one in home health.
And how many clients were you seeing like a day or per week when what was considered a full-time schedule for you?
I would see between 8 and 10 people in a week. Some people were 2 to 3 times a week. Some people were once a week. Sometimes people were once every 2 weeks or once a month just to check in. So that was a full-time schedule for me. And I probably 6 to 8, sometimes 10 people. I would see people from about 9 a.m. to 3:30. I really tried hard to avoid rush hour traffic because I just sat for hours. So 9 to 3:30, I would come home, document. I was building a lot of online content and like the online programs that I have now. So I was probably working from like 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., which I don't recommend to anyone. And that continued for about a year and a half.
Okay. And you were able to see maybe like about 5 people a day then with like transportation time, or?
Yeah, it would go between 4 and 5 people a day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. Because that's, I think, one thing that is a little bit of a challenge when you're doing something kind of unique and like, not just going to an outpatient job where there's kind of standards already for productivity. And in home health, I think it even can vary a lot because it depends on like what areas they're sending you to. And those visits sometimes are shorter. Like when I went to home health, visits weren't usually an hour. A lot of times people couldn't tolerate that long. So I think that's part of one of the things that's challenging when you're making that shift is like, what do you consider full-time? Because what are you trying to get your schedule to? When are you going to stop it and put some boundaries so that you aren't working all the time? How are you giving yourself time for the other things that you need to do in addition to just seeing clients, because there's phone calls and responding to emails and marketing, and that takes a significant amount of time. So I still feel like I kind of struggle with like, what is full-time work? Like how much do I actually want to work? How much do I need to work to like pay the bills? So I think that's really helpful to hear like the details for people, just like what is my goal that I'm trying to get to. And I think 4 to 5 compared to, especially if people are an outpatient where they're seeing 9 or 10 or even more depending on the setting, is like such a, relief, even though there's driving and it's not that you're not working super hard, but you just feel like you really can get to know people and help them when you're actually seeing them for an hour and not seeing, 2 or 3 times as many people in any given day.
Yeah. And, there were some clients that I would have that still couldn't tolerate an hour, even in my mobile practice. And it was just because of, where they were at in the day or their disease. And so I would probably see people between 45 and 55 minutes most of the time. And then I created a radius, like I created a boundary of how far I would drive so that I was always like 15 to 20 minutes away from my next client, sometimes less. If I could swing it and be like 5 to 10 minutes away, that would be really ideal. I think, one question you asked is like, what recommendations do you have for people who are considering a mobile practice? Work for a home health company for like 6 months, maybe a year, only because you'll get to know like whether you actually like being a mobile provider. You get to know like how to manage your own schedule and how to call your patients. You build so much autonomy as a therapist when you're a mobile provider. It can be a really like jarring thing going from an outpatient clinic where maybe your scheduler calls people for you, your admin person does all the plan of care, your doc, you've got like a system. But when you're in home health, most of the time you're doing all the calling, all the scheduling, figuring out your radius. And to do that with a home health company beforehand, like I had 3 or 4 months to like get an idea of what mobile practice would feel like without it being my practice, was like something that I didn't realize was so valuable as far as time management is concerned.
Yeah,
that's a
really
great
smart
idea. Yeah. And I was wondering if you could speak to that about, you mentioned that you regret quitting your home health job. Like, what would you have done then instead? Were you able to cut back your hours or something? Or like, what would you have done instead of quitting it full and starting your mobile?
I would have backtracked all the way to the beginning of Invigorate. I am, as you guys know, a very like emotionally driven person. And it's like, I went to Claire's workshop and I was like, this is what I'm doing. I quit my job like 3 months later, something totally ridiculous. It was August to January. So whatever that is. I was just fueled by passion. I was like, I'm going to change healthcare. I'm going to help all these people. This is what I'm supposed to do. I feel on fire. It's amazing, creating something. And I had zero conversation with myself or my husband about a walkaway contract. How do we know if this is working or not working? How much runway do we have? How much savings do we have? If you don't bring in an income, how long can we go before we need to reevaluate if this is a practical business or if, we need to figure out something else. I flew into it on 100% emotion. And looking back, I would have saved more at my outpatient job. I had a second chance to do that with home health. I was making really good money in home health and able to grow Invigorate, but I got impatient and I was like, I want to go all in on Invigorate because I can, before I had my foundation and my structure and my marketing plan and a savings, really honestly, built up. So when I quit home health, it was like a fire drill. I had to make Invigorate work, which sometimes is good to light a fire under your butt, but it's also incredibly stressful. And if I could have removed that stress for myself and more importantly for my family, my relationship, just being completely candid and honest, like it would have saved so much stress for me and for, the people around me. Mm-hmm. So if you are a smart and savvy business starter, which I was not, but I feel like I'm getting smarter, make sure you have a conversation about runway, around what your savings, how it's impacting your family. Like your family can't be your loan source unless they really want to, but they shouldn't be, in my opinion. And I didn't want my family loaning me money. And every time I didn't pay myself a month, my family was loaning me money. And that's mixing business and personal a little bit too much for me. So I would have stayed with home health until I had like a year's worth of runway and savings where I could, we could just chip out of that. I had built up all that savings. And if I got to the end of that savings and I didn't have a replacement income coming forward, then I would have written myself a contract and said, like, you need to either get another part-time job or, maybe close things down. And that's just the realities of business. Like you shouldn't invest unless you know what your kind of closing plan is. That's something I didn't do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is all such good stuff, Sarah. Thank you for sharing. With home health, was it a little bit flexible? Like, could you kind of be ramping up Invigorate while you ramped down in home health? Or was there like a certain amount for home health that you had to do? So that did kind of like limit how much you could do for Invigorate. Was it flexible at all? Or was it like a part-time, you had to do it at least 20 hours, at least a certain number of clients every week?
It was PRN, so it was on call. I was, whenever I did home health, I started out at the 0.8 full-time, kind of the 80% full-time position. And then that did require me to have 32 hours, something a week, to be full-time, 0.8 full-time to get my benefits. And I could have switched to PRN, but I was like, I'll be fine. I've got a full caseload. And I think I actually did stay on technically PRN, but the caseload wasn't consistent and I didn't have a territory. So they would be like, you know, Sarah could go all over Austin. So I think I turned down a few clients as a PRN PT. And then when Invigorate didn't do well, I was like, well, I need to put all my time on Invigorate instead of like, oh, well, no, like should just increase my caseload as PRN home health. I could have done that option. I didn't because I was not wise in that moment. Just being honest, I didn't have that maturity level. I don't think. I was like, I'll make it work.
Yeah. And that's a lot to save up. I mean, even I'd say for a lot of people where like how much money, it's hard to save money because you're kind of like spending the money on your like rent and living and student loans and stuff like that. So it is hard to think about saving up that amount to be able to have that runway, even though obviously it makes a lot of sense. It's a very smart thing to do. But I think that's for a lot of us, like, you know, you're just making enough anyways. So it's like, it kind of feels like you have to make that leap. But I think it definitely makes sense for most people, like Erin did, like registry first when she started with Reactive. And I kind of always had multiple part-time jobs. So I was able to be a little bit flexible. Like as I got my things going more, I could back off other things. But yeah, you need like a little bit of flexibility where there can be something you could do where there's income coming in still and try to like wean over time. And then I think you're right too, like just how long you give that time period. Like it was great that you were so successful pretty quickly, but then yeah, it's like, that's just not a long-term tested thing yet to know that you can expect that to happen month after month after those first like 3 to 6, you know, successful months.
Yeah. And I think you know, Claire, you did multiple things. You still kind of wear multiple hats in multiple ways. And I think that's actually a really wise thing. And I think it stretches out your ability to build, you know, Rogue, because you do give yourself a little bit more floating space versus when you cut off all your other income sources. Don't do that if you're not for sure of your income. And even just switching Invigorate from mobile practice now to an online practice, that's kind of like completely switching business models again. And, you know, I'm now to the point where I'm like, well, maybe I should try and diversify my income a little bit and have Invigorate be part of it, but also maybe work more into the part-time because it can be unpredictable no matter what phase of your business you're in. So it's always just, I think it just comes down to like telling yourself that this is just business and it means nothing about your value. If you're struggling to make income, like you can find another source. It doesn't mean anything about like your business. That's something that I struggle with is like, oh, my business isn't doing well. Like nobody likes me and nobody wants to buy my stuff and, you know, all that stuff that comes into play. So just be a big girl is what I tell myself and put on your big girl panties. And what would a big girl do? She'd get another part-time job.
So I feel like you've already given so much advice of like how you do things a little bit differently. Is there anything else that you would say for someone who's wanting to start a mobile practice now, anything that we haven't gone over already that you would give as advice?
I would say, I think something now that I realize is having your foundation set up as far as like your website and Google Analytics. Like if you're going to create your website, if you haven't done it yet, first of all, pay someone to create your website and have them, you know, have a conversation about what your goals are for your website and your practice, but also see if they are familiar with Google Analytics and helping you set up some conversion tracking. Those are big words, but like helping you plug in Google Analytics so that you can track your data from day one. You're going to need that data. Who's coming to your website? Where are they coming from? Who's contacting you? How good is your website converting leads? Like it seems like really icky stuff to some people, but that's like knowledge is power and data is wisdom. And the more data you have early on, the faster you can like track it and grow. So that's like something that I really wanted to hit home is create your website and get Google Analytics set up all in one fell swoop.
I don't even have Google Analytics now. Like, okay, notes to self.
Notes to self.
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah. And if you've got a different way to track like your conversions, that's great. And also Google Analytics is like.
Yeah, it took me a long time even to have a website too.
I know.
So yeah, and I think we wanted to ask you more about kind of that transition then, and now what you're doing with Invigorate with more online. But since we've already been talking for a long time, I think maybe we'll have to do a part 2, because we would love to ask you more about that, like kind of why you decided to make the transition. I could see though, like just with reviewing how you got started with, doing your marketing and doing everything on Facebook and kind of building that community, I can see how like that transition maybe got started because of what you were doing for your marketing, which I would say is pretty, especially like a few years ago, was pretty like forward thinking and different. Like still now, I'd say for a lot of practices like neuropractice, there isn't necessarily that much of an online presence aside from maybe just a website and maybe some videos, but nothing like consistent. So I think it'd be great to talk more about that marketing and then your transition to the online business, but maybe we'll save that for like a part 2 interview because that would probably be like another hour.
I know.
I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, I think this will generate a lot of questions from people too that we can just like add on to another conversation. I feel like I've just been wanting to keep picking your brain, and that's why we've continued to talk on and on and on, like, oh, what about this? What about that? So
yeah. Did you want me to tackle Julie and is it Rupali's questions? Since they posted them?
Yeah. I think we kind of talked about Rupali's question about like your starting budget and if you she asked about what are options to use for an address for your mobile practice without using your residential address. And you talked about the website, so the address question.
I saw that, and maybe it's different in Texas, but in Texas, you're able to use your residential address. You just can't use a P.O. box. So I just used my residential address. So I'm not sure if that rule is different. I saw her question, but
I think there are some differences in different states. Do you know if the paperwork that you filed, was it available to the public that had your home address on it? Because that's, I think, one thing is that like that corporate paperwork that you file, it's public record. Not that I don't think any of my clients necessarily knew that or would look it up, but it was just like if you were trying to not have your home address be publicly available, we can ask Rupali to follow up and see if that was her reason for it, if there's some other reason why she can't use her home address, because you definitely can use it. But I think, at least as far as I know in California, you can use it, but I think it's just if you're trying not to for another reason. But you initially started with your home address. Yeah.
And I think there are probably businesses out there that'll, you can pay them to use some billing address, or like LegalZoom probably uses their address. I'm not really sure, but my address is all over the internet, unfortunately, and I don't know what to do about it. I do, like for my email service provider, Rupali, if this helps, is I am a co-working member at this place downtown called the Capital Factory, and they give you like an address to use. It's their address. It's just like Sarah King, Attention Invigorate, 601 Brazos or whatever it is. And so that's a co-working space address, but they let me register like that. People can send me mail there and that stuff. It's not my address. I don't know if I could actually do that for a legal business since it's another business's address already, but that might be an option.
And I know the main thing in California is like the reason you can't use a P.O. box, for us at least, which probably is the same for Texas, is you have to be able to be served papers. So if there was a legal like subpoena or something like that, papers have to be able to be served. So that's why it has to be like not a P.O. box. So I think that a co-working space probably would work because it means like if they can accept mail and if there's someone maybe there who could accept if legal paperwork came in and they would accept it and get it to you, then I think that does work, which is why, and in California, it's a little iffy depending on who you ask, but multiple attorneys have told me like here a UPS box, because they have a physical address and there is an individual there and they will accept legal paperwork. And that's really like the main reason that it has to not be a P.O. box. So it's a little iffy because like the bank didn't really like the UPS address, but I used it for, filing my corporate paperwork. And it's been fine. And basically that was the reason for it. But I think that's another reason why having an attorney is a really good idea, because that's what they tell you why things are a certain way and what you can and can't use, and at least can help support you in understanding that, because there's a ton of stuff that like we don't, that we're not going to understand all of it. You can read a lot online and not fully understand exactly why you can and can't do different things.
Totally.
But yeah, that was helpful. And then
Julie Denby was asking if how did you say no to other folks that needed PT? Were you busy enough? Was that easy to do that? And were you ever tempted to branch out beyond PD?
I saw that question, and I was asked to see people who didn't have Parkinson's by other physical therapists who knew I was doing a home health practice. People had been diagnosed with stroke or ALS or other neurological diagnoses. And there were times that I was tempted because I, needed to make revenue. It came down to me deciding that was going to be a bit of a distraction from, one, it would be a bit of a distraction from my practice. If I say I'm 100% Parkinson's specialized, I should probably stay that way. But also the way that my practice was set up, like if someone had just had a stroke, they need skilled physical therapy. And I'm a cash-based provider. And it just got into this place where I was like, you probably need skilled-based PT. You probably need a lot of equipment, if you've just had a stroke. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to see you because I have very little equipment, and everything that I've done is kind of tailored to maybe a little bit higher level, or, it didn't feel right to me. It was tempting, but it was also kind of a distraction. I think, is it Simon Sinek has the, why?
Start with the why, yeah.
Start with the why. And also Steve Jobs always talked about focus, and that's how you grow, is by focusing. And if you take on too many projects and too many people, you're just spread out really thin and you don't have the energy to grow like what you really want to grow. So stand firm, commit yourself to just getting, if it's Parkinson's only that you're going for, like focus on just getting that, I would say.
Unless you like the other thing.
Yeah.
It's about where, like you're kind of saying, like basically what your experience was, what your interest was, what you like doing, and you already decided that. You kind of narrowed down your niche. But like myself, I don't want to just see people with Parkinson's. I like all neuro. I like doing wheelchair assessments. I like doing really low level rehab stuff. That's my favorite, actually. So like if that's what you would want to do, it's just like kind of being true to what is your vision and mission. It kind of goes back to what's your why, and then what's your overall vision? What do you want for your practice? Where do you want it to go? And then what is it in line with that or not when you get those phone calls?
Yeah.
And it probably also does make it a little bit more complex depending on what you're accepting for payment, because like with how Sarah described exactly, who was kind of appropriate, it was more clear cut that it made sense that you weren't really going to qualify for Medicare. Whereas when people would potentially qualify, then it's really them needing to pursue it. But if you are seeing people where it's more clear cut that they really would qualify for Medicare covering, then if you were just cash-based, it seems like that would be a lot more complex to try to have an algorithm and have that always figured out. So it seems like in that case, depending on who you want to see, what they qualify for, then it may, that just also influences your decision in terms of what your payment's going to be. So I think really like getting clear cut about those things. Who do you want to serve? How do you want to run things? Which is hard to do though, because I think a lot of people do like a lot of different projects, a lot of different populations. And it's true that like if we're doing too many different things, it's going to be hard to do anything really well.
Yeah. And we'll have more follow-up on the Medicare stuff, because I think this will probably bring up a lot of questions for everyone. And I feel like with Medicare, there's always follow-up questions, like constantly forever. So we'll be doing that more. But I think it'll be really helpful for people to check out some of the things that you've done already. You have an interview with Jared Carter that will make sure everybody gets the access link to, and then your ebooks that you've written, a guide that you have, and as well as the like starting ebook, and then also your marketing slides from when you did the Women in PT conference would be really helpful. So we'll make sure everybody gets a link to access all of that. And then,
beautiful.
Yeah. Any follow-ups of how, last things you want to say, or how people might get in touch with you or anything like that?
I feel like I've said so much and probably overtalked. So if you want to check out my practice, it's invigoratept.com. On YouTube is Invigorate PT and Wellness. Instagram, Invigorate PT and Wellness. Check us out on Facebook. I'd love to connect. I would say that if you're going to contact me, shoot me an email is the best way to get a hold of me, because people try sending me Facebook messages and I just don't ever see them. Or Instagram messages, I just don't. So email, shoot me a message through the website. I've got a bunch of resources on the Invigorate website as well for therapists. So you can head over there, book a consult if you want to chit chat with me. But I'd love to come on again and answer more questions for you guys. I'm so proud of you guys, not to be like, all mushy, but you guys are doing such awesome things with the Neuro Tribe. So it's so fun to watch.
Well, we're super excited that you're in Mighty Networks with us now. And you're definitely the seed. I don't think people know that you really had this idea to start NeuroCollaborative anyway. So it's been awesome to kind of just keep you looped in with the things that we're doing and active in the community, because you have a lot to offer people.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, Claire and I had a drink some point a few years ago, and that's where it was all born. But you guys have taken it and run with it. I have nothing to do with the Neuro Tribe, so you guys are doing an awesome job. Have me back anytime.
Thank you. Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Excited to see you in a couple weeks in Japan.
Yeah.